Whether it's your home turf or the road, who has the advantage in combat sports? The fighter or the hometown hero? Which one is it? Is there even such a thing as a hometown advantage? Let's take a look at it. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of our show. And for those of you who may be new around here, I'm your host. Now, over the years, we've had quite a few episodes about fighters returning home to defend their home turf. And many of these episodes were often sparked because of certain fighters who seem to get special treatment in their home country. Like Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira in their trilogy, or Francis Ngannou defending his title against Cyril Gane in his native France. But if you boil down all of these discussions to its essence, you always come back to one simple question. Is there really such a thing as a hometown advantage? Because we know that fighting in front of your own cheering fans can be a great source of motivation. But does it also add more pressure to perform? Does the fighter actually have an advantage going into this fight? Or is it quite the opposite? And while we still haven't come to a final conclusion on this issue yet, because it depends on so many different factors, we do have some solid clues that might finally lead us to the answer, especially after what went down this past weekend. Now, before we continue, we would like to thank all of our patrons for their continued support, and a big shout out to our newest member. We greatly appreciate you all for helping us to continue to produce the show. And if you are interested in becoming a patron, you can click the link in the description below. Alright, so let's continue. One of the biggest factors that can determine whether a fighter has the advantage going into a fight is the type of event they are fighting at. If it is an international event where two foreign fighters meet, and one happens to be defending their title, then the odds are that they will defend their title successfully. Like when Israel Adesanya defended his middleweight title against Robert Whittaker in front of a pro-Adesanya crowd in his adopted home of New Zealand, or when John Jones returned home to defend his light heavyweight title against Dominic Reyes in front of a pro-Jones crowd. In both cases, the champion defended their title successfully. However, the same cannot be said if it's the visiting fighter who ends up defending their title. Like when Alexander Volkanovski traveled to the Mecca of combat sports, Brazil, to defend his featherweight title against challenger Jay Rodriguez. Or when Kamaru Usman traveled to England to defend his welterweight title against Leon Edwards. In both cases, the champion lost their title. But why did this happen? Well, in both cases, the reason came down to one key factor, which is the energy of the crowd. As we mentioned earlier, fighting in front of your own cheering fans can be a great source of motivation, but it can also be a major distraction. Just ask any fighter who's ever fought in Brazil, especially in Rio de Janeiro. You literally have 20,000 people who are on their feet screaming, stomping, making tons of noise every single second. And trying to focus on the task at hand in that situation is borderline impossible. In fact, most Brazilian fighters are used to fighting in this environment, which is why many of them consider the UFC event in their home country as the ultimate test. Like, if you can win in Brazil, then you can win anywhere. And that is actually a true statement. Take, for example, Anderson Silva. He was invincible during his long title reign in the middleweight division, except for the time he faced off against Chris Liban in 2008. And that wasn't just a normal UFC event. It was UFC 82 in the home state of California. So basically, it was a home game for Laban. And as crazy as it sounds, the energy from the crowd actually affected Anderson Silva. Like, he was visibly irritated throughout the entire fight. And in the end, he ended up losing via knockout. In fact, it got so bad that after the fight, Silva stormed out of the octagon without acknowledging the fans. But when asked about it later, Silva gave an honest assessment. It was very tough to fight in this place. The energy of the crowd was amazing, very tough. That's why I walked away. Basically, Anderson Silva was so amped up to fight in front of a hostile crowd that he forgot to stay focused on the task at hand. And in the end, it cost him the match. And while this example goes way back, a similar situation happened with Fabricio Werdum, who was once the heavyweight champion. Now, Werdum had the chance to defend his title against Stipe Miocic in his home country of Brazil. And just like Silva, Werdum let the energy of the crowd affect him, resulting in a third-round TKO loss. And it's not just limited to striking heavy divisions either. Middleweight champion Israel Adesanya also lost his cool after getting frustrated with the crowd in his second fight against Alex Pereira. The energy of the crowd actually got so bad that the referee had to intervene. All of this to say that the energy of the crowd can have a tremendous impact on the psyche of a fighter, which ultimately affects their performance. So it's only fair to assume that if the crowd can negatively affect the psyche of a champion who's fighting in a foreign country, then it could also work in favor of a fighter who's fighting in their home country. Take, for example, the previously mentioned Francis Ngannou, who was the heavyweight champion. In his first title defense, he was matched up against Cyril Gane in France, in Gane's home country. And despite being the champion, Ngannou wasn't able to cope with the energy of the crowd. Like, the volume was deafening. The whole stadium was on their feet for almost the entire fight. And in the end, Ngannou lost the match. In fact, after the fight, Ngannou acknowledged the crowd. "I respect this guy, Cyril Gane, and I respect the French fans. They pushed him a lot tonight. It was a great atmosphere, a great energy." In this case, the crowd was so loud and supportive of their hometown hero that it was hard for Ngannou to cope. And in the end, it made the difference in the fight. Now, obviously, we can't judge all events by the same standard. Like, a main event title fight in the home country of a champion is completely different than a non-title bout between two foreign fighters. But what's important to note here is that in most cases, the fighters themselves acknowledge that the energy of the crowd played a part in their performance. And this actually brings us to our next point, which is the effect the crowd has on the judges. Because if the crowd can have a negative effect on the visiting fighter, then it's only fair to assume that they could also have a positive effect on the hometown fighter. And as crazy as it sounds, this has actually been proven. Researchers at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, actually conducted a study to see if crowd noise affected the judge's decision. And the results were shocking. Out of 180 bouts studied, the home fighter won 58% of the time, which is well above the 50% mark. And this held true even when controlling for variables such as skill level and type of martial art. And although 58% is a great win rate for a home fighter, the researchers didn't stop there. They wanted to dive deeper into the data and see which rounds were more susceptible to the crowd's influence. And what they found was even more surprising. The crowd had the biggest influence on the judges in the opening round, with the home fighter winning 69% of the time. However, as the fight progressed, the crowd's influence diminished, with the home fighter only winning 47% of the third and final round. What this tells us is that the judges are likely influenced by the crowd noise, but they tend to ignore it as the fight progresses. This could be because the judges become more focused on the technical aspects of the fight, like which fighter is landing the cleaner, more significant strikes, which may not be as obvious in the first round. And while this data is from a single study, it's supported by anecdotal evidence. Just think about all the close fights that were decided in the first round, especially when the hometown fighter is involved. Chances are the crowd probably played a part in swaying the judge's decision. All of this is to say that the hometown advantage is real. Even though it's not as prevalent as it used to be, the crowd can still have a big impact on the outcome of a fight. It's something that fighters need to be aware of, especially if they're fighting in a foreign country. So what do you guys think of the hometown advantage? Is it real, or is it all hype? And do you think it's more pronounced in striking heavy divisions, or in grappling heavy divisions? Comment your thoughts down below. And if you enjoyed this video, stay tuned for more episodes of our show. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.